A 7-year-old girl, the daughter of the cleaner, developed a friendship with the millionaire who owns the company. When she witnesses an elegant employee doing something unthinkable, her conscience won't let her stay silent. With remarkable courage, she marches to his desk, points at the woman and demands, "Uncle, fire that woman. She's very bad." He grows irritated until she details the cruel acts she witnessed. The shock on his face turns into horror when he realizes that the woman being exposed is none other than his own wife. The scent of beeswax and ambition hung in the air on the 42nd floor, an aroma that 7-year-old Lena couldn't yet decipher. Sitting on a small wooden stool hidden behind a giant fern, she was turning a sheet of copy paper into a garden of misshapen flowers with her colored pencils. To her, this office was a castle of glass and steel, a silent labyrinth where the loudest sounds were the hurried clicks of expensive shoes on polished marble and the low hum of computers that never slept. Her mother, Sophia, moved like a discreet shadow between the desks, her cleaning cart gliding effortlessly, her face focused on leaving everything spotless. Sophia always told her, "Be a little mouse, my love, quiet and invisible, so you don't bother anyone." And Lena tried, but her big, curious eyes absorbed everything. She saw the tired faces, the forced smiles, and the tense shoulders of the people who worked there, pinned to their chairs like butterflies on a board. The owner of the company, Mr. Arthur, was different. He didn't walk, he glided, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a gaze that seemed to carry the weight of his entire immense fortune. Yet, whenever he passed Lena's hiding spot, a genuine smile would soften his features. "And how is my resident artist today?" he'd ask, his voice deep and kind, as he crouched down to admire her drawings. He saw in her a purity that money couldn't buy, a spark of life amid the monotony of his stock trades and investments. He affectionately called her "my little dividend of joy." To Lena, he was just Uncle Arthur, the gentle giant who gave her imported chocolates and whose hugs smelled of coffee and confidence. This unlikely friendship was her little secret, a ray of sunshine in this cold, impersonal environment. But today, something shattered the silent peace of her small world. A voice, sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the air. "Clara, get in here, now." Lena peeked through the fern's fronds. A stunningly elegant woman in a tight blue dress and a pearl necklace that gleamed like teeth was staring down a young secretary who was visibly trembling. The woman, Isadora, flipped through some papers with palpable disdain. "This is unacceptable. You are paid to be competent, not to waste my time with amateur mistakes. Did you even proofread this report?" The secretary, Clara, stammered, her eyes filling with tears. I did, ma'am. I thought it was all correct." Isadora's response was a dry, cruel laugh. "You thought, darling, we don't pay you to think. We pay you to execute orders flawlessly. It seems even that is too much to ask." Each word was a blow. The other employees around them lowered their heads, their fingers typing faster, their eyes glued to their screens, creating a bubble of deliberate indifference. No one looked. No one said a thing. Clara began to cry silently, tears streaming down her face as she apologized repeatedly. Lena felt a knot form in her throat. Her red-colored pencil stopped mid-petal. Her mother had taught her not to bother anyone, to be invisible. But what her mother hadn't taught her was how to ignore cruelty. She saw the pain on Clara's face and the cold satisfaction on Isadora's. The injustice of the scene was as clear and ugly as an ink smudge on her drawing. In that instant, her promise to be a quiet little mouse dissolved. A flame of indignation, hot and fierce, ignited in her chest. An idea, audacious and terrifying, began to form in her 7-year-old mind, an idea that could change absolutely everything. The image of Clara crying in silence was etched into Lena's mind, a dark stain on her day. Her mother, Sophia, approached discreetly, the lavender scent of the cleaning spray enveloping her like a soft hug. She ran a hand through her daughter's hair, noticing the stiffness in her small shoulders. "Is everything okay, sweetie? Remember, we're here to work. Don't look, don't listen, just draw your flowers." Sophia's voice was a whisper. Laden with an urgency Lena was beginning to understand. It was the urgency of fear, fear of losing her job, of drawing attention, of being a problem. But her mother's words, once a safe harbor, now sounded like a cage. How could she not look when meanness was happening right in front of her? She nodded, a small, dishonest movement, and forced the colored pencil to move again. But the joy of drawing was gone. The world of adults, with its unwritten rules and disguised cruelty, seemed a dangerous and confusing place. She felt small, not because of her age, but because of her powerlessness. Later, the afternoon sun streamed through the immense windows, painting the marble floor with rectangles of gold. Most of the employees were out for lunch, and the office was quieter. Lena, still in her hideout, watched Isadora, the woman with the pearl necklace, approach the desk of a man named Robert. He was smiling proudly, showing her his computer screen. "It's ready, Ms. Isadora. The presentation for tomorrow's meeting. All the data on the profitability of the new investments is here. Mr. Arthur is going to be very pleased." Isadora leaned in, the smile on her lips not reaching her cold eyes. "Excellent work, Robert. Let me just take a quick look. Perhaps I can suggest something." Robert, flattered, got up to get a coffee, leaving her alone at his desk. Lena watched, her heart beating a little faster. She saw Isadora's nimble fingers dance over the keyboard. It wasn't a long movement. It was quick, almost imperceptible, a click here, another there. In less than 10 seconds, she stepped away, just as Robert returned with his cup. "Everything looks perfect, Robert. Keep up the good work." The disaster struck late that afternoon. Mr. Arthur called Robert into his office, the frosted glass door closing behind them. Lena couldn't hear, but she could see the silhouettes. She saw Robert gesturing enthusiastically, pointing at a screen, and then she saw Mr. Arthur's posture change. He leaned forward, his silhouette becoming tense. The meeting, which should have been a triumph for Robert, ended abruptly. Robert walked out of the office, pale, his face a mask of confusion and humiliation. Shortly after, Lena heard Uncle Arthur on the phone, his voice controlled but filled with an icy frustration. "It was a rookie mistake, one that could have jeopardized significant capital. I can't tolerate that kind of carelessness in my business." Lena felt a chill in her stomach. She knew Robert hadn't made a mistake. It was her, the evil woman. She had sabotaged his work on purpose, making him look incompetent. It was a cruel game that only Lena seemed to be watching. The injustice was so huge, so overwhelming, it made her short of breath. The silence her mother so valued now felt like a scream trapped in her throat, and she knew, with the absolute certainty of a child who sees the world in black and white, that she couldn't keep it trapped for much longer. She looked at the door to her Uncle Arthur's office, an imposing barrier of wood and glass. Behind that door was the only adult who could possibly fix this. But would he believe a 7-year-old girl over such an elegant and important woman? The days that followed were filled with the tension that Lena could feel in her fingertips. She became a silent observer, her drawing now a cover for her surveillance. Every time Isadora walked by, with her expensive perfume and her glacial smile, a shiver ran down Lena's spine. She noticed how employees shrank back, how lively conversations died into whispers as she approached. Isadora was like a storm cloud in a summer sky, and everyone seemed to know instinctively when it was time to seek shelter. Sophia, her mother, noticed the change in her daughter's behavior. Lena was quieter, her eyes more serious. "What is it, my angel? Are you tired of this place?" she asked one afternoon, her voice full of concern. Lena just shook her head. How could she explain what she saw? How could she put into words the subtle malevolence, the cruelty hidden behind good manners and designer clothes? Telling the truth would put her mother at risk, and the weight of this secret was almost too much for her small shoulders to bear. On Thursday, she witnessed the third act of this cruel play. A young analyst, Michael, with round glasses and a contagious enthusiasm, was pitching an idea to a department head. Lena, from her observation post, heard snippets of the conversation. Michael spoke of a new type of investment in green technology, something that could bring in a huge profit and improve the company's image. The manager seemed impressed, nodding in approval. Michael's face glowed with hope. Later, however, Lena saw Isadora talking to the same manager near the water cooler. Her voice was low and melodic, but her words were poison. That idea of Michael's, it's a bit naive, don't you think? Risking that much capital on something so volatile. It could affect our stock value. It's the kind of youthful recklessness a billionaire like Arthur can't afford. She smiled, patting the manager's arm. It's our duty to protect his assets from idealistic impulses. The effect was immediate. The admiration on the manager's face was replaced by a scowl of concern. Minutes later, he called Michael into his office. This time, the door was left ajar, and Lena could hear the manager's harsh voice echoing down the silent corridor. "Your proposal is irresponsible, Michael. Almost amateurish. What have we come to, where a rookie thinks he can play with the firm's assets like it's monopoly money?" The hope on Michael's face crumbled, like a sandcastle hit by a wave. He left the office with his shoulders slumped, the light in his eyes completely extinguished. Isadora, watching from a distance, took a small, satisfied sip of her coffee. It was then that Lena understood. These were not isolated incidents. It was a pattern. Isadora fed on the fear and insecurity of others. She undermined confidence, destroyed careers, and crushed dreams for sheer pleasure, or perhaps to ensure no one else shone brightly enough to overshadow her own position. The anger Lena felt was a physical force, hot and bubbling. Enough with being a little mouse. Enough with hiding. Someone had to stop this woman, and if none of the adults had the courage to do it, then the task would fall to her. She looked at the massive door of Uncle Arthur's office, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was like the door to a powerful king's castle, a king who needed to know there was a dragon loose in his kingdom. The decision solidified in Lena's heart with the force of concrete setting in the sun. The fear was still there, a cold little creature gnawing at her insides, but the anger was a fire that warmed it and pushed it forward. She packed her colored pencils into her small backpack with an unusual solemnity, like a soldier preparing her weapons. Each pencil put away was a vow, a promise to herself that she would no longer stand by. Her mother was on the other side of the floor, focused on cleaning the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to her. It was the perfect opportunity. With a deep breath that made her small chest ache, Lena stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she took the first step, then the second. The marble hallway, once just a path, now seemed like a suspension bridge over a chasm. Each step echoed in her ears, a drum announcing her impossible march. A few employees looked up from their computers, surprised to see the small figure marching with fierce determination toward the sanctum sanctorum, the big boss's office. The dark wood door to Uncle Arthur's office was taller than 3 Lenas stacked on top of each other. It had a golden handle that gleamed like a treasure. For a second, panic paralyzed her. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Be a little mouse, my love, invisible." But then the image of Clara's tear-stained face and Michael's slumped shoulders gave her the strength she needed. She didn't knock. She simply pushed the heavy door, which swung open with a low groan. The office was even bigger on the inside. One wall was entirely glass, offering a dizzying view of the city below. Uncle Arthur was sitting behind a desk that seemed the size of a ship, his face lit by the blue glow of multiple screens displaying incomprehensible graphs and numbers, the steady pulse of the stock market that fed his immense wealth. He was on the phone, his voice calm and authoritative, discussing a new investment in euros that promised an extraordinary return. He didn't notice her right away. Lena stood there, a small intruder in the center of power, smelling the scent of leather and money that permeated the air. Finally, he hung up the phone and his eyes found her. The initial surprise gave way to his usual warm smile. "Lena, my little artist, did you come to show me a new drawing?" He gestured to the chair in front of his desk, a leather armchair so large she could disappear in it, but Lena didn't move. She remained standing, her fists clenched at her sides. Arthur's smile faltered, noticing the unusual seriousness on the little girl's face. "What is it, dear? Did something happen?" This was the moment. Courage or fear, a voice or silence. Lena swallowed hard, her heart beating so loud she thought he could hear it. She raised her small arm, her index finger trembling slightly, and pointed past the glass partition of the office, toward where Isadora was overseeing the employees with an eagle eye. Lena's voice came out louder and firmer than she expected, cutting through the respectful silence of the place. "Uncle Arthur," she said, her eyes locked on his, "fire that woman. She's evil." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The smile vanished completely from Arthur's face. His expression, once kind, hardened, turning into a mask of annoyance and disbelief. The gentle giant was gone, and in his place was the billionaire who had no time for childish nonsense. His eyes narrowed, and a coldness Lena had never seen before took over his gaze. The air in the room grew thick, heavy with Arthur's disapproval. The kindness he had always shown Lena evaporated like dew in a harsh sun. His voice, when he finally spoke, had a cutting edge that made her flinch. "Lena, what is this? What kind of game are you playing? You do not point at people, and you certainly do not speak that way." He stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow over her. The irritation on his face was clear. To him, this was just a child's whim, an impertinence disrupting his meticulously organized day, a day dedicated to managing a fortune that stretched across continents and currencies. "I apologize if someone has upset you, but this is a place of business. It's no place for childish accusations." He walked toward the door, his intention obvious, to take her back to her mother and end this bizarre episode. Fear threatened to swallow Lena whole. He didn't believe her. He saw her as just a silly little girl. Defeat was a bitter bile in her throat, but then the images returned, sharp and painful. Clara trembling, Robert humiliated, Michael desolate. Those people had no voice, but she did, and she couldn't waste it. "It's not a game." Her voice trembled, but it carried a desperate conviction that made him pause with his hand on the doorknob. He turned, one eyebrow arched in impatience. "Uncle Arthur, please, you have to listen to me." Tears of frustration welled in the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to cry. She needed to be strong, to be clear. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if she feared being cut off. "I saw it. I see everything from my corner. I saw her yell at Clara until she cried, and nobody did anything. She said Clara wasn't good for thinking, only for obeying, and everyone pretended they didn't hear." Arthur crossed his arms, his expression still skeptical, but a flicker of curiosity began to dilute his irritation. He listened to hundreds of business proposals, analyzed complex cash flows, and decided the fate of millions of dollars every day. But the earnestness in this child's voice was something he couldn't simply dismiss. Lena continued, her voice gaining strength with each sentence. "And Robert, he made a beautiful presentation on his computer. He was so happy. But when he left to get coffee, she messed with his computer. I saw her. She was fast, but I saw her. And then you got mad at him. You said he made a mistake. But it wasn't him, Uncle Arthur. It was her. She made him look stupid on purpose." The detailed description of Robert's incident made Arthur flinch. It was an internal detail, something a child shouldn't know. He remembered his fury at the glaring error in the report, a mistake that could have negatively impacted his financial holdings. He had reprimanded Robert severely. The certainty on his face began to crack, replaced by a shadow of doubt. He looked at Lena, really looked at her for the first time since she'd walked in. He didn't see a child throwing a tantrum, but a serious witness, her eyes wide and filled with a distressing truth. Her narrative, so specific and coherent, began to erode the wall of disbelief he had built. He didn't want to believe it, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, his gaze now focused and intense. "Lena," he said, his voice lower and more serious. "Continue. What else did you see?" Lena felt a small wave of relief as she saw the change in Arthur's gaze. The coldness had receded, replaced by concentrated attention. He was listening. She took a deep breath, organizing the jumbled thoughts in her mind. The office, once an intimidating place, now felt like a stage where she was the only actor with the truth. "Michael," she went on, her voice steadier. "He had a really good idea about plants and things that don't pollute the world. His boss liked it. I saw him." But then she went to talk to the boss near the water cooler. She spoke quietly, but I heard her. She said Michael's idea was silly and dangerous for your money, that it would make you lose your assets. She mimicked Isadora's condescending tone, a syrupy voice with an undercurrent of contempt. "She said it was a boy's dream and that it could ruin your business." Arthur remained silent, his face impassive, but his eyes betrayed an inner storm. He remembered the manager's report on Michael's proposal. The words naive, risky, and imprudent jumped out in his memory. They were the same words Isadora often used when she wanted to discreetly undermine his confidence in someone or a project. "She does it all the time," Lena said, the realization hitting her with full force as she spoke. "She smiles, but her eyes don't smile. She makes people feel small and scared. Everybody lowers their head when she walks by. They're afraid of her, but it's not fair. They work hard, Uncle Arthur, and she just ruins everything." The simplicity of her analysis was brutally effective. She didn't use corporate terms like toxic work environment or psychological harassment. She used the words of a child who sees injustice in its purest form, the strong hurting the weak. Arthur stood up and walked to the large window, turning his back to Lena. He looked down at the city below, a vibrant metropolis built on ambition, power, and often cruelty. For years, he had isolated himself at the top, surrounded by numbers, charts, and reports. He trusted his managers, his senior team, to handle the human side of the company. He managed the capital, the net worth. They managed the people. It was an efficient division of labor. But Lena's words were like stones thrown into a still lake, the ripples spreading out and disturbing the calm surface of his certainties. He began to connect the dots, the high turnover rate of assistants, promising employees who suddenly lost their spark and resigned, negative reports about people he had once considered talented. He had always chalked it up to the pressure of the high-performance environment he cultivated. It had never occurred to him that there might be a subtle poison spreading through the halls, a deliberate corrosion coming from someone so close to him. He turned to Lena, his face a mask of seriousness. He wasn't fully convinced yet, but the doubt was a hook lodged in his mind. He needed more than a child's word, no matter how sincere it seemed. Yet he couldn't just ignore it. The loyalty in Lena's eyes was undeniable. "Lena, what you're telling me is very, very serious," he said, his voice grave. "You understand that, don't you?" Lena nodded, her chin held high. "I know. That's why I told you." Arthur sighed, the heavy sound of a man confronted with an inconvenient truth. "The woman you're talking about, Ms. Isadora, she isn't just an employee." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers, as if preparing her for a blow. "Lena, Isadora is my wife. The revelation landed in the silent room with the weight of an anvil. Lena's eyes widened in shock and horror. The dragon she was trying to slay wasn't just a monster in the castle, she was the queen. Lena's world tilted on its axis. The queen, the evil woman, was Uncle Arthur's wife. The revelation hit her with the force of a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of her. Suddenly, it all made a terrible kind of sense. Isadora's unquestioned power, the way everyone feared her, the complicit silence of the other employees. She wasn't just a manager, she owned everything, by association. The gentle giant was married to the dragon. A chill ran through Lena's body. She hadn't just accused a random employee. She had attacked the wife of the most powerful man she knew, the man she had come to for justice. The fear, which had been held at bay by the adrenaline of her courage, came rushing back, icy and paralyzing. She looked at Arthur's face, trying to decipher his expression. There was no more irritation, only a deep weariness, a sadness that seemed to come from an old, dark place. He looked like a man who had just been told a truth that, deep down, he might have already known but refused to admit. The castle door she had pushed open didn't lead to a just king, but to a nest of complications her 7-year-old mind could barely begin to comprehend. "Your wife?" Lena whispered, the word feeling foreign in her mouth. Arthur nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes, Lena, my wife." The silence stretched between them, filled with 1,000 unasked questions. What did this mean? That he would defend her, that he would be angry with Lena for speaking ill of her? Lena's head was spinning. She had made a terrible mistake. Her mother, what would happen to her mother? If the boss's wife found out, they would surely be thrown out. The image of her mother, working so hard, so proud of her job, being fired because of her, was unbearable. The tears she had held back with such effort finally escaped, streaming hot and silent down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her small body trembling. "I didn't know. Please, don't tell her. Don't fire my mom." The desperation in her voice seemed to break something inside Arthur. The facade of the impenetrable billionaire, the master of the corporate universe, crumbled. He knelt again. This time not with the authority of a boss, but with the tenderness of a man seeing a child in genuine distress. Hey, look at me," he said, his voice soft. He took her small hands in his, which were large and warm. "Nobody is going to fire your mother. Do you hear me? You were very brave to come in here and tell me this. The bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do in this building." His words were a balm to Lena's panic. She looked up at him through her tear-filled eyes. "But she's your wife," she repeated, the confusion still clouding her reasoning. Arthur sighed, a sound that carried the weight of years of denial. "Yes, she is. And maybe that's why no one has ever had the courage to tell me what you told me today." He looked past Lena, at his life, at his marriage, at the empire he had built, and saw, perhaps for the first time, the cracks in the foundation. For years, he had focused on accumulating wealth, on growing his assets, on diversifying his investments in gold, crypto, and international stocks. He saw people as pieces on a chessboard, moving them to ensure maximum profit. He had forgotten to look at their faces, to hear their voices. A 7-year-old girl, the cleaner's daughter, had just taught him the most brutal and necessary lesson of his life. The truth had been spoken. The seed of doubt was no longer a seed. It was a deep and thorny root, growing quickly in his heart. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The silent war for the well-being of the employees in this company was no longer Lena's alone. Now, the king knew there was a dragon in his castle. The question was, what was he going to do about it? In the days following that fateful conversation, a subtle yet palpable shift settled over the 42nd floor. Lena, now aware of Isadora's true identity, felt the weight of her secret with every passing moment. She tried to focus on her drawings, but her eyes inevitably sought out the elegant figure of the boss's wife, watching her with a mixture of fear and fascination. For his part, Arthur began to observe his own workplace with new, critical eyes. Lena's words haunted him, forcing him to reevaluate interactions he had once considered normal. He started noticing the frightened glances, the interrupted conversations, and the tension Isadora left in her wake. She was never openly rude in front of him. Her cruelty was a subtle art, practiced in the shadows, with double-edged words and smiles that didn't reach her eyes. He noticed how she would praise an employee in front of him, only to later, in a casual remark, plant a seed of doubt about that same person's competence. It was masterful manipulation, a power game he, in his bubble of deals and numbers, had never perceived. Isadora's campaign to discredit Lena and her mother began insidiously. She didn't know about the conversation in the office, but the closeness between the girl and her husband bothered her. She saw Arthur's genuine affection for Lena as an anomaly, a weakness. "Darling, don't you think it's a bit inappropriate?" she remarked one evening over dinner in their lavish penthouse apartment, the city glittering at their feet. The cleaning lady's daughter, running around the office. It sends a message of unprofessionalism. Besides, you never know about the character of those people. Arthur, who might have once agreed distractedly, now felt a pang of disgust. She's a child, Isadora, and her mother is an exemplary employee. His defense was calm but firm, which surprised Isadora and put her on alert. She sensed a new resistance in him, a wall that wasn't there before. This only hardened her resolve to remove this little stone in her shoe. The first direct attack came disguised as concern. Isadora approached Sophia as she was cleaning the break room. "Sophia, dear, I need to have a word with you." Her voice was honey, but her eyes were ice. "I appreciate your work, but I've been receiving a few complaints, small objects vanishing from desks. Nothing of value, of course, a picture frame, an expensive fountain pen. You know how it is." The accusation was veiled, but the message was clear. Sophia's face turned pale. In 20 years of work, her honesty had never been questioned. "Ma'am, I would never touch anything that isn't mine." Sophia's voice trembled, humiliation burning her cheeks. Isadora patted her on the shoulder, a gesture that was more of a threat than a comfort. "I know, dear, I know, but perception is everything, and having your daughter here every day, it can lead to misunderstandings. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if she didn't come anymore." Lena, who was listening from behind the door, felt the floor drop out from under her. The threat was real. The evil queen wasn't just attacking her, but trying to destroy her mother's reputation, the only thing they truly owned besides each other. The war had been declared, and Lena realized with growing terror that her courage had placed the person she loved most in the world directly in the line of fire. Isadora's veiled threat hung over Sophia like a dark cloud. She became more withdrawn, her movements even quieter and more hurried. The fear of losing her job was a constant presence, a knot in her stomach that wouldn't go away. She tried to forbid Lena from coming back to the office, suggesting she leave her with a neighbor, but Lena vehemently refused. "I'm not leaving you here alone, Mom. I have to stay with you." There was a fierce determination in her eyes that Sophia couldn't break. Lena knew she couldn't abandon the battlefield now, not when her mother was under attack because of her. Guilt weighed on her chest, but it was overridden by a protective instinct that made her more vigilant than ever. She felt like a little sentry, guarding her mother from the dragon who breathed lies instead of fire. The office, once a glass castle, now felt like enemy territory, filled with invisible traps. Meanwhile, Lena's courage, like a seed planted in arid soil, began to sprout in the most unexpected places. Clara, the secretary who had been humiliated, started leaving little chocolates in Lena's backpack. Robert B., the analyst whose work had been sabotaged, always found a way to accidentally drop a sheet of paper with a superhero doodle near Lena's hiding spot. They were small, silent gestures, but they were messages. They were "and we see what you did, and we're with you." The most significant change, however, came from Michael, the young man with the green ideas. Inspired by the little girl's audacity, he began to do something no one else had dared: document. With the discretion of a spy, he noted down dates, times, and details of Isadora's every abusive act. He recorded the public humiliation of an accountant, the subtle sabotage of a marketing project, and the way she manipulated a meeting to make a manager look incompetent. He created a secret dossier on his computer, protected by passwords, an arsenal of truth waiting for the right moment. Other employees, noticing what he was doing, began to contribute, sending him anonymous emails with their own accounts. They were still too afraid to come forward, but Lena's quiet revolution had given them a spark of hope. Arthur, for his part, continued his private investigation. He began having informal conversations with trusted employees, people who had been with the company for years. He didn't mention Isadora directly, but he asked about team morale, about the day-to-day challenges. At first, the answers were evasive, filled with the corporate jargon that hid the truth. But Arthur was persistent. His genuine concern, something he hadn't shown in a long time, began to break down the barriers of fear. One longtime manager, after much hesitation, finally confided, "Mr. Arthur, people don't feel safe to innovate. There's a constant fear of making a mistake. A mistake here isn't a learning opportunity. It's a nail in your career's coffin." The confession didn't name names, but Arthur knew exactly who he was talking about. The culture of fear that permeated his company, affecting productivity and the profitability of his businesses, had a source. And that source slept beside him every night. The evidence was mounting, not in spreadsheets or stock charts, but in whispers, in glances, and in the secret dossier he didn't yet know existed. The truth was coalescing, gaining mass and weight, preparing for the moment it would become impossible to ignore. The third week began with an ominous calm, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Isadora, sensing Arthur's silent resistance and the strange solidarity forming around the cleaner's daughter, decided it was time for a devastating offensive. Subtlety was no longer working. She needed something that would destroy Sophia's credibility so completely that Arthur would have no choice but to fire her, thus removing Lena's irritating presence from her life for good. Her plan was cruel in its simplicity and diabolical in its execution. She knew that Arthur kept an antique gold watch in his desk, a family heirloom from his grandfather, an object of immense sentimental value, far more precious than any amount in dollars or euros from his vast fortune. It was the only thing in his minimalist office that held deep personal meaning. Isadora waited for a moment when Sophia was cleaning Arthur's office while he was on a long conference call in another room. With the agility of a predator, she swept in, gave Sophia a condescending smile and said, "Just grabbing some documents. Carry on." While pretending to look for something in a drawer, she skillfully palmed the gold watch from the desk and, as Sophia turned her back to empty the trash can, she slipped it into the side pocket of the cleaning cart, burying it under some dirty rags. She left the room as casually as she had entered, leaving a ticking time bomb behind. The chaos erupted an hour later. Arthur finished his call and, upon sitting at his desk, immediately noticed the watch was missing. A cold panic washed over him. He checked his drawers, under his papers, in his briefcase. Nothing. It was Isadora who suggested the terrible possibility. "Darling, are you sure where you left it? The cleaning lady was just in here. I don't want to accuse anyone, but times are tough." The poisonous seed was planted. Reluctantly, Arthur called the head of security. Company policy demanded an immediate investigation in the event of theft. Sophia was called to the security office, her face a mask of confusion and fear. Lena, waiting for her in the hallway. felt absolute terror as she saw her mother being escorted by two uniformed men. The discovery was swift and humiliating. In front of Sophia, the head of security, and Arthur, who watched with a heavy heart, the cleaning cart was searched. And there, nestled among the dirty rags, was the gold watch, gleaming accusatorily. Sophia gasped, the air stolen from her lungs. "No, I didn't. I swear, I didn't do it." Tears streamed down her face, the desperate denial in her voice. But the evidence was damning. The stolen object was found among her work belongings. To the head of security, the case was closed. Isadora watched from a distance, a veil of false concern on her face, but her eyes shone with the triumph of victory. She had done it. She had framed the cleaner, destroyed her reputation, and created a situation from which Arthur could not escape. He would have to fire her. It was the perfect play. Arthur looked at Sophia's devastated face, and then at the watch in his hand. Lena's words echoed in his head. She just ruins everything. He felt trapped, forced to choose between the logic of the evidence and the truth a 7-year-old girl had shown him. His company, his sanctuary of order and control, had become a courtroom where the innocent was about to be condemned. News of the accusation against Sophia spread through the office like wildfire. The atmosphere, already tense, became suffocating. Employees whispered in corners, casting glances of pity and fear toward the security office. Most believed Sophia was innocent, but no one dared say a word. Isadora's trap had been perfectly laid, creating a public narrative where anyone defending the cleaner would be seen as an accomplice or a fool. Lena sat in the hallway outside the room, her body curled into a small ball of misery. She could hear her mother's muffled sobs through the door, and each sound was like a knife in her heart. Guilt was a monster devouring her from the inside. It was her courage, her decision to speak out, that had led to this. She had tried to be a hero, but instead she had put her mother in the most terrible of situations. The weight of her responsibility was crushing. As she waited, feeling like the loneliest person in the world, a figure approached and sat beside her. It was Michael. He didn't say anything. He just held out his hand and offered her a piece of chocolate. The simple gesture, an echo of solidarity in the midst of despair, was enough to break the dam. Lena began to cry, a silent, convulsive sob that shook her entire body. Inside the room, Arthur was at a crossroads. Business logic, the rules that governed his empire of wealth, demanded swift, decisive action. Firing Sophia was standard procedure. Keeping an employee accused of theft, especially of such a personal item, would undermine his authority and set a dangerous precedent. Isadora swept into the room, the very picture of concern. "Darling, I know this is awful," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It's a shame. She seemed like a good woman, but we can't tolerate this. Think of what the other employees will say." Her words were calculated to corner him, to force his hand. But Arthur looked at Sophia's face, ravaged with pain and humiliation, and saw the same injustice Lena had described. The evidence was against her, but his gut, the raw truth in that child's eyes, screamed that something was terribly wrong. He asked to be alone with his wife. As soon as the door closed, Isadora's mask flickered. "Arthur, don't hesitate. Do what needs to be done." The coldness in her voice struck him. "And what exactly needs to be done?" "Isadora," he asked, his tone dangerously calm, "fire a woman based on evidence that has appeared far too conveniently." Isadora realized her mistake. She backpedaled, the faux concern returning to her face. "I'm only thinking of the company, of our assets." But it was too late. The seed of suspicion Lena had planted had grown into a tree of certainty in Arthur's heart. He finally saw the pattern, the calculated cruelty he had ignored for so long. He felt like a blind fool, manipulated within his own kingdom. The anger he felt wasn't just for Isadora, but for himself, for his complacency, his negligence. He had allowed this poison to spread, affecting the lives of innocent people. He looked at his wife, and for the first time in many years, he didn't see the woman he had loved, but a stranger, a manipulator whose need for control knew no bounds. The decision he made in that moment wasn't about a stolen watch or one employee. It was about the soul of his company, and perhaps his own. He walked out of the room, leaving Isadora behind, and went to the hallway where Lena was crying. He crouched in front of her, his gaze firm and resolute. "Lena," he said, his voice filled with a new authority, "I need you to be brave one more time." Arthur's request echoed in the silent hallway, a spark of hope in Lena's darkness. She lifted her tear-stained face, her red, swollen eyes meeting his. Courage. She didn't think she had any left. The disaster with her mother had drained all her reserves. But Arthur's expression wasn't one of pity. It was one of respect. He wasn't talking to a child, but to an ally. What do I need to do?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I need you to tell me everything again," he said, his voice low but intense. But this time, not just to me, to everyone. The idea was terrifying, to speak in front of all those adults, with the evil queen watching, ready to tear her down. Fear made her want to shrink away. But then she looked at the closed door behind which her mother was suffering, accused of something she didn't do. That love, the most powerful force in her small universe, overrode the fear. She nodded, an almost imperceptible but firm movement. Arthur stood up and, with an authority he hadn't wielded in years, called an emergency all-hands meeting in the main lobby. No one knew why, but the tone of his voice left no room for questions. In minutes, the vast marble atrium was filled with employees. The silence was tense, charged with speculation and anxiety. Sophia was brought to the center, pale and trembling, standing beside a grim-faced Arthur. Isadora joined them, positioning herself at her husband's side, projecting an image of support and solidarity, but her eyes shone with a predatory light. She believed this was the moment of public execution, the consolidation of her victory. Then Arthur called for Lena. Holding her small hand tightly, he guided her to the center of the circle of curious faces. A murmur went through the crowd. What was the cleaner's daughter doing here? "Today," Arthur began, his voice resonating in the cavernous space, "a very serious accusation was made, an accusation of theft against Sophia, a dedicated employee. The evidence appears conclusive." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Isadora stepped forward, ready for her speech on trust and integrity, but Arthur held up a hand, silencing her. "However, sometimes the things we see are not the whole story. Sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected source." He looked down at Lena. "Lena has something to say." All eyes turned to the little girl. Her heart was pounding, a war drum in her chest. She looked at her mother's frightened face, at Isadora's triumphant expression, and at the dozens of employees who had suffered in silence. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice, small but clear, filled the silence. She told them about Clara's humiliation, about the sabotage of Robert's work, about the manipulation against Michael. She didn't stammer. Every word was precise, every detail vivid. She was no longer just reporting facts. She was giving voice to the pain and fear that everyone there felt. Isadora tried to interrupt, laughing dismissively. "Arthur, this is ridiculous. You're going to believe the fantasies of a child." But Arthur wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Michael, who, upon hearing Lena's account, stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "It's not a fantasy," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I have proof." He opened his laptop, and in seconds, the secret dossier was projected onto the large screen in the reception area. Emails, dates, times, testimonies. Isadora's systematic cruelty, documented in irrefutable detail. What had been a whisper became a roar. The crowd gasped. Isadora's mask finally shattered, revealing the naked face of malice. She looked at her husband, expecting him to defend her, to put an end to this farce, but Arthur just looked back at her with a cold, profound disappointment. The Queen was naked in her own court, and it was the voice of a child who had dared to say she wore no clothes. The revelation of Michael's dossier was the wave that broke the dam of fear. The tense silence of the atrium was replaced by a growing murmur of confirmation. Robert stepped forward. "It's true. The sabotage of my report, it happened exactly like the little girl said." Then came Clara, the tears in her eyes now of relief, not pain. "Ms. Isadora, she told me I was useless, that my presence at the company was a liability to the cash flow." One by one, other employees began to speak, their voices joining in a chorus of validation. The stories, once locked away by fear, were now shared openly, each one reinforcing the next, painting a devastating picture of power abuse and psychological manipulation. Isadora's authority, built on silence and intimidation, crumbled in minutes under the weight of collective truth. She stood exposed in the center of the atrium, her face pale with rage and shock. The woman who controlled everything had lost control spectacularly. Her only weapon was denial. "They're all liars, ungrateful. They're trying to destroy our family, Arthur, our fortune. Are you going to believe them over me?" But Arthur was no longer listening. He walked toward Sophia, who was watching everything, stunned. He took the gold watch from the security guard's hand and held it out to her, not as a stolen object, but as a peace offering. "Sophia," he said, his voice thick with remorse, "I offer you my deepest apologies. To you and to everyone who has been hurt in this company under my watch. I was blind, and I regret it more than words can say." He turned to the head of security. "There is no case here. Ms. Sophia is cleared of all suspicion." Then his eyes met Isadora's, and the coldness in them was absolute. "As for you, Isadora, you are terminated from any and all positions at this company, effective immediately. Our lawyers will be in touch." There were no shouts, no scene, just the calm, final declaration of an end to an era of tyranny. Isadora, defeated, turned and walked away. Her once proud stride, now hurried and shameful, the sound of her heels echoing her solitary retreat from the empire she had helped poison. With her departure, it was as if a dark cloud had lifted, allowing the sun to stream in. An atmosphere of relief and quiet celebration filled the space. Sophia, finally free from the weight of the false accusation, hugged Lena tightly, crying into her hair, "My brave daughter, my hero." Their embrace was a sanctuary, the epicenter of this small revolution. Arthur watched the scene, a complex feeling of sadness and hope stirring within him. He had built a business empire, a vast portfolio of assets and stocks, but he had nearly lost his humanity in the process. It took the unwavering honesty of a child to remind him of what truly mattered: dignity, respect, justice. He approached Michael. "What you did, that took immense courage. Starting tomorrow, I want you to lead a new employee wellness committee. Your first task will be to implement the ideas you have for making this place better." Michael's face lit up with disbelieving joy. The seed of his idea, once crushed, was now promised a chance to bloom. Justice, on that day, wasn't just about punishing evil, but about finally allowing good to thrive. The company that had been ruled by fear was at last beginning to breathe. 4 weeks after that memorable showdown, the 42nd floor was a transformed place. The change wasn't in the expensive furniture or the stunning city views, but in the air. The tension had been replaced by a palpable lightness, the fearful silence by collaborative conversations and occasional laughter. People walked with their shoulders more relaxed, smiles were genuine, and ideas flowed freely without the fear of humiliation or sabotage. The committee, led by Michael, had implemented new protective policies and anonymous reporting channels, ensuring the culture of fear would never return. Company productivity soared, creativity flourished, and the profits Arthur so prized followed suit, proving that a healthy work environment wasn't a liability, but the greatest asset of all. Arthur, for his part, spent less time locked in his office analyzing the returns on his investment funds and more time walking the floors, talking to his employees, learning their names, and listening to their stories. He and Isadora had separated. The discovery of the depths of her cruelty was a wound their trust could not survive. He realized their marriage, like his company, had become a business, a merger of assets where the emotional capital had long been bankrupt. Sophia continued her work as a cleaner, but now with her head held high. She was no longer an invisible shadow, but a respected member of the team. Employees greeted her warmly, offered her coffee, and asked about her day. She was the mother of the little hero who had set them free, and they treated her with the dignity and respect she had always deserved. Her cleaning cart was no longer a symbol of servitude, but of resilience and honor. Lena still had her corner behind the fern, but she no longer needed to hide. Her wooden stool now sat in an open space, a small, makeshift art studio that Arthur had set up for her, complete with paper of all colors and brand new boxes of pencils. She no longer drew misshapen flowers to pass the time. She drew superheroes with braids, gentle giants who learned to listen, and offices where everyone smiled. Her artwork, full of vibrant color and hope, now decorated the walls of the break room, daily reminders that courage could come in the smallest of packages. One sunny afternoon, Arthur approached Lena's little studio. She was concentrating, her tongue sticking out slightly as she drew a giant sun with a smiling face over a glass skyscraper. He crouched beside her, no longer the billionaire owner of the company, but a friend. "You know, Lena," he said, his voice soft. "You taught me the most important lesson of my life. I spent years building a fortune, collecting money, gold, and assets, thinking that was power. But real power isn't in what you have. It's in what you do for others. It's having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's the hardest thing to do." Lena stopped drawing and looked up at him, her eyes big and serious. "You weren't evil, Uncle Arthur. You just weren't looking." The simplicity of that truth hit him hard. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "You're right, but I'm looking now, and I promise I'm never going to stop looking." He glanced around at the workplace, now thriving with kindness, and knew that the most valuable inheritance he would leave behind wouldn't be his billions, but the story of how a 7-year-old girl, with nothing but her honesty and a loyal heart, taught a king that his greatest treasure was his people.